Hi.
Okay.
Greetings and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I'm Sovereign Sire. I'm a writer. I'm a comedian. Also, I learned how to do my makeup from a group of cholas.
And it shows, baby girl, in all the right ways.
In all the best ways. I lie and I say that my eyebrows are the way they are because I'm a blonde. No, it's because Bianca plucked them into a pencil-thin arch all through middle school and the beginning of high school. And that is the truth. And it does not grow back.
It does not. It does not. And on that note, I'm Ella Darling, a former librarian, a VR porn pioneer, a sex worker, and a lady in a thunderstorm, actually, now that I'm sitting here in it. There will possibly be sounds of thunder intermittently, so enjoy the added atmosphere that we bring to you here on Ill Repute, where we support women's rights.
But more importantly, we support women's wrongs. So, Ella, what women's wrongs are we righting today?
Every female developer and programmer whose work has been diminished by lesser minds who don't comprehend their work or don't respect their abilities. Specifically, Ada Lovelace, the world's first computer programmer and the world's first female dev who was diminished by her peers for no good goddamn reason. Ladies, what's up?
Before we get in, because it's not going to leave me because I'm autistic, the sound of thunder is called a brontide. Yes.
Really?
A brontide.
A brontide. That's fascinating. That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
So
let's get into it.
Let's recap.
So when we last spoke of her, Ada was an awkward teen, fresh off a failed attempt to elope with one of her tutors. Ada was 17 and prepared for her official social debut, where she would come out into society.
Coming out was a pivotal moment in the life of young women of her station at the time. It signified their transition into adulthood and their marriageable availability. It was kind of like a PR tour of balls, court engagements, and soirees.
I'm sorry.
Are you ready ahead?
It was like a PR tour of balls.
It was, though. I mean, they were a little slutty. They pretended they weren't, but like, who was her dad, you know? Like, she was already like doing everything but penetration. Like, yeah, she probably was touring some balls.
Well, like, PR tour of balls sounds like a polite way of talking about like a starlet like making the rounds in Hollywood.
Look, it can be both, frankly. Yeah. So it was a PR tour of testicles, balls, and court engagements, as well as soirees, to promote how dowried and down to marry she was. All aimed at introducing her to potential suitors and the wider social elite. But for Ada, coming out wasn't just about social and matrimonial prospects. It was more about her intellectual awakening and forging of scientific scholarly relationships that would shape her legacy. She didn't really seem to give that much of a shit about her peers or the social climbing. She was just jazzed that she got to be like the grown-up in the room with the scientists who previously only regarded her as a child, but she already kind of knew them, so it's kind of badass.
Now, let's return to where we left off. It was June 5th, 1833. Ada was 17, fresh on the social scene, and mingling at a party hosted at the home of mathematician Charles Babbage in the intellectual and innovative heart of London amidst a period buzzing with the spirit of the Industrial Revolution. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and curiosity as Ada, accompanied by her mother and her tutor, Mary Somerville, stepped into this world of intellectual exploration. Babbage, an enthusiastic inventor, in addition to being a respected scholar, presented his work to his audience, a demonstration of a machine, or rather a portion of a machine, called the difference engine.
And I've included in the script a picture of his built out part of the difference engine. It's a very large glorified calculator, essentially. But that was novel at the time because that didn't exist yet. The difference engine consisted of 2,000 interconnected components made of glimmering brass and steel. It was designed to complete complex calculations and mathematical tables more accurately and efficiently than could have been dreamt possible at the time. So again, they didn't have calculators, and being able to do really quick math sometimes can save lives. We don't realize it these days, but
side note, dreamt is I think one of the only words in the English language that ends in a MT. Anyway,
I believe you're right. It's a really good Scrabble combo. If you have the words for the letters
poet, just when you're working on those end rhymes. Before a computer was a device, it used to be a job title. Cool. People who ran calculations and computations, writing out answers by hand and using complex math. It was slow and inefficient, which is where Babbage saw potential. His machine, although never fully completed, would have been capable of performing mathematical calculations with a precision and reliability that surpassed manual computations.
Meanwhile, Ada was still a society lady and started to be known in the London social scene. She was smart, charming, charismatic, and opinionated, but most importantly, she was infamous because of her father. Still, Ada seemed more interested, like we said, in intellectual pursuits than climbing the social ladder. She was still living at home under the watchful eye of her mother and her mother's Furies, who were kind of her spies at the time. So it's easy to surmise that she was more eager for a change of scenery than the opportunity to mingle with her peers, especially since she primarily sought out other scholars and scientists to talk to and learn from.
Yeah, she liked nerds. She was into nerds.
Yeah, she was one, so...
Yeah. When Ada turned 19, her mother decided it was time for her to find a husband. She had specific criteria for her future son-in-law and wouldn't settle for anyone without an established pedigree and a title, ideally at least a century old. The title, not the husband. He also needed to be patient and understanding regarding her past indiscretions and her father's infamy. She wanted Ada to marry a man who could stoke her passion for math and science, rather than stifle her intellectually. And above all, he had to be kind. She also wanted to protect Ada from the fraught and traumatic matrimony she herself had endured. So she's looking for basically a 666, six-figure income, six-pack, 6-inch dick. Is that? I think that's it.
I mean, you're not
no.
It's
6 figures, 6-pack. 6 feet tall.
Yeah, 666 really, like, as soon as you utter the phrase, I'm like, yes, sire.
And I am a sire, so there you go.
I know. It's like when people call me, okay, darling.
It's in the name.
Meet William King Noel, 8th Baron King, a nobleman 10 years Ada's senior, with a keen interest in science and technology, much like Ada. First of all, important. Picture an aristocratic man of quiet confidence with understated charisma, a keen mind, and a deep appreciation for the arts, especially her father's. William was rich, from a powerful family and title, and he held several estates to his name. Their courtship was set against the backdrop of England's lush countryside and the intellectually stimulating salons of London. In short, he was a golden retriever boyfriend.
We love a golden retriever.
He just supportive, loving, hot, rich, just like yes-anding her.
I love it.
Until he realized he needed to stop yes-anding her all the time.
The two got married on July 8th, 1835, shortly before their positions were elevated, with Ada becoming the Right Honorable the Countess of Lovelace.
As awkward of a mouthfeel as that is, I double-checked. Apparently that was the title.
Yeah, honorifics are really interesting. If you go down that Wikipedia hole, it'll tell you how to appropriately address each honorific. Okay. That isn't to say that everything was perfect in her marriage. She eventually found him to be quite dull, and they eventually grew apart and spent as little time as possible around each other, but the foundation and structure of mutual support lasted throughout. It turns out that even a golden retriever boyfriend can lose his initial luster. He was boring. And
he was
you know what's
boring.
Worse than being anything else? It's being boring. Mm-hmm. It really is. It honestly, I mean, like you can get away with so much socially with people, but you can't be boring. Like it's an anathema.
Socially, absolutely. Yeah. Like you have to be commit to something. Listen, just find a hat that you love if you have to. If that has to be your personality, at least have one.
Like, there are incels out there that can't like get laying down, and somehow Scott Peterson is married. So proof of concept, bitch. Like,
so I'm just going to say a dull husband is better than a violent, controlling one. Like if he was like science and math, I don't think so. Broodmare, get in the kitchen, bitch. Like if he was a married incel and somehow forbade her or restricted her from what she was doing, we might not have seen what she made. The history of computing in general could have been very different if their relationship was different, if her home life was different, if she wasn't given both the support when she was sick and the support and encouragement to pursue her intellectual pursuits. In fact, I believe he even she was a member, I think, of the Royal Society, or she was a member of some big important society, but even as a member couldn't gain access to their library. So he just escorted her in so she could access the library, which he sure wasn't.
Yeah. I think the moral of the story is marry someone that is really infatuated with your father, and then make sure that he's so boring that he's gonna actually not ever try to get in the way.
I'm sorry, I just love how portentous that statement was.
Yeah.
Punctuated by the thunder, by the Brom times.
Honestly, basically the best man is the man that is kind of just disinterested in you either way. That's the moral of the story.
My homie who I did all of the art with, Brendan, his girlfriend Grace has a great take.
Oh, he finally has a girlfriend.
That's
lore. That's
for
lore.
A while now,
I'm referencing lore. I'm referencing canon. Oh, now he has a girlfriend. Huh.
Oh, that's good. They just moved in together. I love her.
Josh, don't edit that out because when he listens to this, I want him to hear that. Oh,
anyway, his girlfriend advised me, if they're not simping for you, what are they doing with their time? And I was like, you know what, girl, you're right. If I'm not everything, what else could be? Not literally. She's a very cool, I want someone who, is excited. Be excited to be here. I'm psyched to be here. And I'm going to over give myself, I know. So I need someone who's at least going to meet me halfway.
Yeah.
Because I'm a people pleaser and I need someone who can meet me. But you're a different kind of bitch.
I have a simp. I have a golden retriever. He's not boring. He's fun. 10 out of 10 recommend. If you want to know how to get him on the first date, I said, this is what I'm looking for. I want romance. I want to dress up and go out and stunt. And I want to never once question whether or not you like me. If you can't meet those criteria, I'm not interested.
I love having a guy who actually likes me.
It's kind of crushing being with my boyfriend because he's made me realize that I've never dated someone that actually liked me before. You
pointed this out to me at some point, isn't it cool to date someone who actually likes you? And I was like, holy shit, you're right. Where was I this whole time in this conversation? But we digress, but with good reason. The years following their marriage were mostly focused on her being a newlywed and bearing 3 children in quick succession, only taking much of a break between children, long enough to have one aggressive bout of cholera. Otherwise, I did the math, the time between children, she was barely ready to again, and she was knocked up once more. So she pumped out 3 quick.
They used to do that. The big reason. So little known fact, while you're breastfeeding, very hard to get pregnant because of your hormones and everything going on there. One of the main reasons that wealthy people would get a nursemaid is so that the woman's milk would dry up so that she would be able to get pregnant very quickly again. Because this is back in the day, you wanted to get the healthiest pregnancy possible, right? And so trying to kind of get that out of the way as quickly as possible and then kind of going off and living your own lives. It was sort of a smart strategy, which is the first few years people are together, they're hot and heavy. So that's when they should do make the babies. Right. Yeah. And then naturally those feelings die off. So if you want heirs, you want to make sure that while it's still hot and generally speaking, when they're young, that's when you want to do the most. So it's taking advantage of that prime time of a marriage where everything's good so that down the line when things fade, you're not still trying to oh God, I got to get an heir. It's you're done. You got it. Yeah.
Handled it. It's efficient. And if you can be anything, you should be efficient, according to Letterkenny. Well, despite being sick, pregnant, or both, and she was sick pretty much consistently on and off throughout her entire life, whether we bring it up or not, you can assume that she's going through spells of illness and unwellness. She continued a scholarly and intellectual correspondence with Charles Babbage and her tutor, Mary Somerville, the woman we mentioned being the reason the word scientist was invented, literally. Ada eventually continued her studies in mathematics, learning more about logic and probability, and diving into advanced math concepts like calculus and complex algebra under famed mathematician who we mentioned in the previous episode, Augustus de Morgan. De Morgan was a philosopher of logic and a founding force behind the London Mathematical Society, but he's probably best known for De Morgan's laws, which underpin modern digital computer logic and set theory. Now, in the last episode, I said I don't know and don't care to know what his laws are. I do know now. It's simple. It's basically if you say, hey, are we gonna do drugs and have fun tonight? And you say no, then we might do drugs or we might have fun, but not both. If I say, are we gonna do drugs or have fun tonight? And you say no, then we're not doing drugs and we're not having fun either way. Let's find something else to do. So it's really just a if and not or like that kind of thing, but it hadn't been defined yet. It feels really second nature to us, especially if you've done any even begrudging programming, that it's a familiar thing in like that sense. But at the time, like that hadn't been established. We hadn't established that rule of logic, and he did. And it's wild to me to imagine people establishing less than, 200 or so years ago, things that are just like obvious second nature.
Ada's dedication to her studies and research was a declaration of her independence, her studies equipping her with the technical skills and insights necessary to fan her intellectual flames. But in the meantime, she had to divide her academic pursuits with very aristocratic obligations of motherhood.
It turns out that bucking some of those social norms was harder than others. Like her own mother before her, she experienced at least a little bit of aversion to motherhood once she found herself immersed in it. And it seems like her maternal instinct was more of a maternal obligation and social obligation. I think if she were born today, she would have had an IUD from the moment she moved out of her mother's house, which would have been immediately upon adulthood. But because of her station, because of where she was at, she had to have kids and she had to be a mom. Now, let's keep in mind, she had a lot of help. She had a lot of people around helping her. And so when she bemoans motherhood, it's like, girl, like, you're barely parenting. But still, she resented motherhood because it took her away from her studies. And I think she resented it because it was an obligation and not a choice for her necessarily. She wrote to her mother, I am not naturally or originally fond of children. Though I wished for heirs, certainly should never have desired a child. Which shows us, like, yeah, I wanted to do the whole heirs, but like, do I have to have a kid to do it? Like, couldn't we hire someone?
I mean, it's the same. It's the same reason that, like, I decided not to have children because people would ask me, and I was like, I've never once been going through anything and thought to myself, is there a way I could make this harder and more expensive?
Yeah,
like never once.
Yeah, no, why have I never had children? Because I've dated enough men that I needed to.
Exactly. So just a day later, she wrote to a prospective governess how she felt about her children. I love this. I've come decisively to the conclusion. I am admirable as an organizer, director of others, superintendent. But practically in details, the less I have habitually to do with children, the better both for them and me. How many, many moments there are when their presence is most irritating and intolerable to me. Add to this my total deficiency in all natural love of children and an exceedingly delicate and irritable nervous system, and you will not wonder that I begin to feel them occasionally, to speak plainly but truly, a real nuisance.
Hard, same, ditto, kiddo. Oh my God. Jam hands? No, thank you. I have obligations like sleeping more and masturbating and scrolling on Reddit. I simply am not equipped to mother a human being. I don't know. Why would you ask this of me? Are you sure you're talking to the right person here? Did I ever tell you when I got my abortion and the doctor was like, I have to tell you that it's twins. Do you still want to do this? And I was like, I want to do it twice as much now. Didn't crack a smile. Like the tough audience. So back to Babbage. Disappointed by the challenges and limitations of the difference engine, Charles Babbage switched gears to build a new machine called the Analytical Engine. His new invention could not only calculate, but also compute, capable of performing any calculation or mathematical operation by inserting a punched card with coded instructions, which was inspired by the jacquard loom, which was a big embroidery contraption. Basically, you would, set the designs on a card, put it in, and it would stitch. The problem he faced at this moment was actually funding the machine, the new machine, the Analytical Engine.
Babbage was never a man to concern himself with business acumen. The British government had already invested more than £17,000, which is almost £2 million today, in his difference engine, when he explained to them that he had halted work on the project to focus on the Analytical Engine, which he explained superseded his previous machine. Charles was a brilliant mathematical and scientific mind, but a diplomat he was not.
He was kind of just honest and judicious to a fault. Like, he just really felt like that was just part of his character, which really stood in the way of his success, as it tends to. Yeah. I cannot tell a lie, but could you try?
Yeah. Could you try?
Despite the Analytical Engine's revolutionary potential, convincing prospective backers of its feasibility was beyond Babbage's abilities. Still, he succeeded in recruiting a talented young mathematician named Luigi Federico Menabrea to write a detailed paper on his engine. Babbage hoped that Menabrea's endorsement of his engine would lead other high-minded scholars to also endorse it, or at least elevate it in the public mind, so that he might at some point get someone to invest.
Hey, the struggle is real.
He's like, maybe if someone writes about it on Medium, hey, should we hire a publicist?
Exactly.
I don't know. Yeah.
So after Luigi Menabrea published his paper on the analytical machine, Ada took to translating it from French to English. From passages from the life of a philosopher, Charles Babbage's autobiography.
And I included this because a lot of haters gonna hate, and I want everyone to hear it from the horse's mouth. The man who invented the machine said this about our girl. After she translated the article, he said, I then suggested that she should add some notes to Menabrea's memoir, an idea which was immediately adopted. We discussed together the various illustrations that might be introduced. I suggested several, but the selection was entirely her own. So also was the algebraic working out of the different problems, except, indeed, that relating to the numbers of Bernoulli, which I had offered to do to save Lady Lovelace the trouble. This she sent back to me for an amendment, having detected a grave mistake which I had made in the process. So he wrote this part of the thing for her so she didn't have to deal with it. And she was like, hey, you did it up, actually. I fixed it for you. Just an editorialization right here. He goes on, the notes of the Countess of Lovelace extend to about 3 times the length of the original memoir. True. Their author, Ada, has entered fully into almost all the very difficult and abstract questions connected with the subject. The 2 memoirs taken together, Ada's and the original, furnish to those who are capable of understanding the reasoning a complete demonstration that the whole of developments and operations of analysis are now capable of being executed by machinery. Babbage is saying here, hey, everyone, I told her to write this because she knows more about it than anyone except me. And she did it by herself. And the only time I helped her, she was like, oh, you're not helping, you this up. So this is literally, if we can trust anyone, we can trust the creator of the machine when he asserts that she actually did this. She did. And if I sound defensive right now, it's because I am, because history has not treated her kindly.
Okay. I imagine we're going to get into that.
I'm just like up in my feelings. We will, but like, I'm just going to like come out swinging right now.
In September 1843, Ada Lovelace published her paper on the Analytical Engine in Scientific Memoirs under the title Sketch of the Analytical Engine with Notes from the Translator. Ada was 27 years old, an aristocratic, married mother of 3 children at the time. Her final published paper included 7 important notes labeled A through G that contained her observations, her assertions, and it turns out, her legacy?
So we're going to kind of skirt through notes A through F. I had to actually go through the alphabet in my head because it's not numbers. And then we're going to focus on note G. So I'm going to really get through it here. Her paper starts off with note A, where she compares the difference engine and the analytical engine, basically establishing what they are, how they're different, etc. And from there, she goes on to explore the analytical engine's method for doing a lot of really cool shit, including executing operations and the concept of programming through punch cards. So like how it does what it does with cards. She discussed the internal memory of the machine, which we might today think of as RAM. She talked about its ability to handle iterative processes and conditional branching, which is today very operative in coding. She talked about error detection and correction, so security features. She also talked about its ability to abstract and generalize mathematical operations. So it was doing the work of the difference engine, but elevated and way beyond. It's like the difference between a calculator and like a TI-89. That's actually probably a really good comparison to make because the TI-89s are small computers.
It is her final note, note G, which became recognized as a monumental achievement in the history of computing. Here, she meticulously details the process for using Charles Babbage's Analytical Engine to craft what is now recognized as the world's first computer program, designed to calculate Bernoulli numbers.
Ada's paper was a huge achievement, both for her and for the future prospects of Babbage's machine. But Charles Babbage remained caught up in his feelings about the government refusing to finance his project. He was still really mad about this. So he penned a preface for her paper in which he laid out his litany of grievances and his deep-seated discontent about the government failing to support his work and his research. And it was pretty much just a manifesto on his frustration about not being able to secure funding, which, as a reminder, they gave him and then some for the project he just off from, which was part of why they didn't want to give him more money. But okay. To sum up what happened next, very succinctly, Ada sent Babbage a final draft of her paper, and she asked him to kind of write an endorsement, like, you know, give me an intro to endorse what I'm doing from the original creator. And instead, he sent her an angry screed against the government, and he kind of insisted that it be published, and he was really aggro about it.
Okay. So he writes the angry screed against the government, but he doesn't put his name on it. So Ada and her publishers had some notes. They needed him to sign his name to this introductory statement, which was pretty inflammatory. It wasn't even that any of them said no to including it. They just wanted him or like anyone but Ada to like take ownership for the weight of that discourse, lest it be like misattributed to Ada, who was like their star scholar du jour. So a mutual friend even offered to sign his own name to the statement just to get things going. But this didn't jive with Babbage, who one must presume didn't want to sully his own name with his own missives. Babbage flatly refused to budge and instead doubled down on his stubbornness. Rather than compromise, he asked Ada to withdraw the paper entirely. One can easily guess her feelings on that idea.
He was talking to his friends who supported his big mad ideas, and they were like, yeah, she's writing this thing about your engine. Well, then you should include this, and you don't have to sign your name. You don't have to do it. Was a bunch of like, it was basically, imagine a bunch of incels like egging on someone online where they don't actually have to take accountability for the thing they're telling him to do.
That. What it is, here's what it is he knows he's not being listened to. And she, who he feels some kind of ownership over because he's her mentor, right, is basically like what he's really doing is they already don't listen to me. They've already written me off. You're the star. So I want you to say it. And you owe this to me because I made you. Like I made you.
You owe
this to me.
Yes.
And she's like, I'm not I'm not going to do that because I'm a woman. It's already tough out here. Like, I'm not going to lump on like your particular beef. I'm not going to take on your challenges. I'm sorry that you don't feel that I don't feel as passionate as you do about the ways you've been wronged. And I don't want to take on like your beef. That happens all the time. Basically, he's saying, now you need to advocate for me. Then it's going to have more weight than if I say it. And she's just basically going like, I'm not going to rock the boat like that for you. That's not a fair ask.
Yeah. From her perspective, it's not her fault that he up so hard on his commitments, contracts, and responsibilities. She's doing what he encouraged her to do, which was write her own take on the paper and expand on it. She did the thing they discussed. She's like, hey, I did this thing. You like it. You approve it. It passes your muster. Could you just give me like a quick endorsement? He really sees her as like a mouthpiece. And while they were friends and they had like, I don't think this applies to their entire friendship. I think he really valued her as a whole person and really valued her mind. I think in this moment of weakness and fragility for him, I think he was really seeing her as an extension of himself and not her own intellectual mind and person, which I think he eventually kind of like, I have to assume they kind of did.
It's a thing to do as a mentor. It's a really thing to do as a mentor to basically, she's written something really phenomenal. And he, because of his own ego, he doesn't think he's on it, but like, that's kind of what he's doing. But like, he's not in that moment, he's not registering that, you know, it's a very human thing. Like, I got you here and like, you should be helping me and you should be as upset as I am that I'm not getting this funding and why I helped get you to here. And now that you're here, you don't want to help me. Like it's a very human kind of not seeing the forest for the trees, head so far up your own ass, especially when your ego's been wounded. Like, and you know, and they, but you know, men are logical. Yeah. Men are all logic. You know, we're so emotional.
Totally.
We're so emotional.
I feel like I'm about to start menstruating right now. I want to acknowledge that sometimes people are, and it's not because of anything except humans are vulnerable and prone to being unfortunate humans sometimes. And just like you said, but Ada recognized this too. She felt affronted by his decree. She published it anyway because but they still kind of they maintain their friendship.
You get through. I've been through with friends where it's just like, you didn't defend me, or like, why don't you publicly say XYZ? And then like when things cool down, it's like, oh, sorry about that. That was actually kind of a thing to ask you to do. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She knew that he wasn't trying to really overstep. She published it just under her first initials, A.A. King, because she knew she couldn't put her very feminine name to it and have anybody actually read it. And then after everything, she sent him a letter. And it was basically a 16-page ultimatum saying, look, man, if we're going to keep like really working on this, if you want what you're doing to succeed, here's what we need to do. You need to basically let go of this as a business and hold on to it as a creation. Work on your creation. Let me handle the business. She was a titled, established woman who was at this point incredibly respected because of her paper. It really, as a woman, because she was her mother's daughter and she was already primed to be in those circles, it elevated her significantly.
Ego,
So
like ego's a bitch. Like ego will get you every ego and your knees. Ego and your knees are gonna betray you. They're gonna betray you so hard in life.
It's true.
So hard.
It's true.
Ego you can fix. Once your knees are gone, bye. And here's the problem, right? Is that like as like an artist or like as a creator, whether it's a scientific project, whether it's like an arts project, is when you're really good at something, you kind of start to assume you're kind of good at everything.
Charles Babbage didn't have that, and he was not that.
Because when you make a thing, its practical and inherent virtues are obvious. They're obvious.
Yeah.
Right.
So she had access, and she had her mother, who was a scholar, who, you know, she had so much opportunity. And Babbage just kind of was like, "Well, let's see why don't you tell us what Babbage said?"
She sends him the 16-page letter. And his response is, quote, Tuesday, 15. That's Ada Lovelace, saw AAL this morning and refused all the conditions, unquote. That's from his diary, from his little...
16 pages, and he says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's like
10 words.
Okay,
is
so
it
do you
10?
remember? Okay. Elizabeth Holmes, that whole corporate fraud, and where
Yes.
I support women's rights, but more importantly, I support women's wrongs. This is the birth story. The birth story is
yes,
from the court proceedings. Elizabeth Holmes, right? Texts were submitted as part of discovery. Her boyfriend was like the CEO, like the whatever. Okay. She sends him like a 2-paragraph block text of like, you know, I love you so much. And you're the tiger and I'm the this, and we're doing this together and all the things. And then his response was like, yeah. And so I screenshot that and then I quote tweeted it and I said, I support women's rights, but more importantly, I support women's wrongs. It was like she had sent him this like screed, and his response was like, yeah, one word.
The fact that she wasn't on trial for murder is a testament to this woman.
I was like,
at that point, frankly.
I don't think she did it. But like, you know, even if she did do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's his whole ass response. Like, nah. Like, nah? Okay, great. Amongst those who were intellectual and informed enough to grasp the technical depth and foresight of her work, which, to be fair, were few and far between, Ada's paper was received with respect and admiration. It was a small hill, but she was the queen of that hill. Her paper bolstered her reputation amongst the small but elite circle of intellectuals and scientists who were already privy to her brilliance, or at least knew her name, which was pretty much everyone because she was infamous as the mad lad's daughter, as she was. She, at this point, Ada had arrived. That's my favorite part in Google Maps when it says, you have arrived. I'm like, finally! Ada, at this point, had arrived. And then she started flirting with new ideas and concepts, like mesmerism. You know, like you go to your doctor today and ask for a good dose of mesmerism.
For those that don't know, I'm like, we'll get into in the script, but like a very brief, there was this guy, Mesmer, and basically what he was doing was like group hypnotism, but it was called mesmerism. And they would kind of have these wild parties like in Switzerland where there'd be like all these nobles like gathered around and he'd be like mesmerizing them. And he invented the term like animal magnetism. So that's just a brief thing. I did a graphic novel about Mesmer. Anyway, Ada became fascinated with the human brain, which of course they all did, and started crafting models to write a calculus of the nervous system, leading to her research in mesmerism. So she didn't buy into kind of like the woo-woo elements that came along with mesmerism, like clairvoyance, mysticism, spiritual, which is kind of where Mesmer was really kind of making his coin. He was a grifter. 100.
The electricity, the magnetism, like that was what interested her. She was interested in the science aspect of it, much in the way that people who are skeptics are willing to give some, credence to ideas that they have not yet studied. And that's what a good skeptic does. They approach things skeptically, but with an open mind.
She was interested, obviously, in the implications of understanding the relationship between electricity, magnetism, and what they at the time called nervous energy. Because physics, etc., energy, the idea of the body as a machine, and the desire to control the body. And we've had this from the dawn of time, from the humors to everything else. It's like this idea that the body functions on systems that can be controlled or manipulated to create certain outcomes, which is the underpinning of everything, right?
Now, at this time,
you know what it was like?
What?
Scientology.
It was totally like Scientology.
Why had she been to fine court before? Because these are all aristocrats. These are all aristocrats. They all know each other. It's like, imagine Scientology and like celebrities. So if you were running a cult, like, or a scam like mesmerism, you would be very attracted by wealthy adherents. And then if you was an adherent that had scientific credibility, sign me up. That's what mesmerism was essentially promising. And they were promising it through these powerful demonstrations of essentially group hypnosis, where it was like, by using the power and harnessing the power of magnetism and all of these things, I'm able to like control these people's behavior and experiences, right? So she sees that and is immediately like health implications. So she's drawn to it. Right. Now, they're trying to establish the legitimacy of what they're doing and the science of it. And they've got like a very popular socialite who's very well respected for like her scientific acumen. And she's interested, like, hell yeah, let's get her on board. Right? Like that, like it's a tale as old as time. And it still happens today. At some point, we're all going to need help and not be able to function at the way that we want to. So these things are very attractive. They're so attractive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ada reached out to one of the emerging names of mesmerism at the time, a man named Andrew Cross. He was a bit of a recluse, which might have been why she reached out to him, because she didn't think he would get all actionable. But he ended up just responding to her and inviting her and her husband to come and visit his estate called Fine Court, Fyne Court. And good Lord, was that court fine? Because Ada ended up visiting without her husband because he was sick and he delayed their departure. And finally he was like, you know what, girl, like, you really are excited about this and I could not give less of it. So why don't you and Andrew just go to his estate and y'all have a fun time? This was pretty common in their marriage at this point. They were a little bit comfortable being separated from each other. So it wasn't out of the ordinary. But yeah, basically she was invited to discuss her ideas at this really cool estate. And she got there and she was fascinated. Just like you said, she got there and it was like, holy, this is amazing. It was very inviting. It was very convivial. It was very permissive compared to what she was used to at home, in any home she'd ever lived in. Like, it to some degree bucked Victorian expectation. She had noted to her husband in a letter that she was treated just like a man, but we'll go on to learn maybe why she told her husband why she was just one of the boys there. But in any case, she really did feel comfortable. She was able to just be free and not feel the weight of Victorian confinement as a woman, especially as a mother and a wife. And she had a great time. And then she got really, really fascinated with her host's son, the man that she called Young John, even though he was 5 years older than her. He had just gotten back from Germany and he had published over there, which apparently at the time was kind of a big deal. It's like, you can publish here and do fine, but God, publishing in Germany, that's where the real money is at. So she was really inspired by the fact that he had just gone on this German tour. I think it was probably a little bit also inspired by his, because I'm pretty sure, and everyone's pretty sure, they were, and if they weren't, they should have been. And we're going to unfold that briefly. So why don't you tell us about that?
So for the duration of her visit to Fine Court, John Cross, the son, and Ada would stay up late talking and drinking wine every night, bonding over shared scientific discourse. Scientific intercourse, scientific connection with an X. Anyway.
With an X.
Over the next step.
The great throwback, by the way, to the last episode.
That's what we call in comedy a callback. Over the next several years, Ada and John would become incredibly close. While John Cross was and remains an elusive figure in history, we can glean from his agreement to destroy nearly all of his correspondence with Ada upon her death to protect her name and legacy that there was probably more than intellectual camaraderie. Yeah.
He was very kind of unpinned downable, even in his lifetime. I read a very interesting but not worth writing about thing where Ada's husband was like, who is he? I think he has a wife and kids. No, he doesn't. And it turned out the big reveal was that he did have a woman with whom he had children, but they weren't married. And that was his big disgrace. He was committed to a woman who he had children with. He was like, ideal. Oh my gosh. In response, Ada's husband was like, maybe he shouldn't stay with us anymore because they're not married. He moved in with them. After her death, Ada bequeathed to John the only heirlooms that she possessed from her father, including the bloodstone signet ring that he gave her, or that he left for, I suppose, her mother, the lock of hair that Byron had sent to Ada, along with his final letter to Annabella. So a lock of hair, a cool ring, and a very personal letter. And she gave that to this guy. She was so definitely not her husband, not her children, not her mother. So I'm sure it was super above board. Everybody in history is so certain that they definitely weren't definitely at all. But and she bequeathed this to him with a little note that was sort of like, I hope you'll use this in all of the great ways we use this together. It was such an illusion to them that like anybody who tries to pretend that they weren't is kidding themselves. But I will say,
isn't that also like
John treasured
like to her husband? Because wasn't her husband actually kind of really into Lord Byron? And wouldn't that have been something?
Kind of really into him. Yeah, and it probably would have been something he would have been interested in. Her first child was named after Lord Byron. Her first child's name was Byron. But yeah, it was this guy. She also apparently, and I didn't have enough confirmation of this to include it in the script officially, but I think that on 2 occasions, she gave him her family jewels to pawn to save her from financial ruin. The first time being dire, the second time, one biographer was like, yeah, she didn't have to do that. She kind of was just in love with him.
Yeah.
It's like she never loved anyone. Yeah. So anyway, she bequeathed to him those things. And he really seemed to appreciate and treasure those things. He was denied access to her on her deathbed by her mother, who was being right at the time. But he did agree, as we can see, to destroy all of their communications for her benefit. And he passed down these gifts from her to his own children. And 4 generations on, at least, these items are still treasured by that family. So she gave it to her boyfriend, basically, because she knew that he was going to treasure it the most of all. And he did. And he honored that. And he still passed on the gravitas of that to his descendants, and they honor it to this day, which is probably the best thing she could have asked. The best thing Byron could have asked.
Well, yeah, I mean, but also it's like someone willed you like Elvis's ring. Like, of course, I don't know if they honor it, but they understand its value. Like, you know, we're 200 years old. Like, I doubt they're sitting there going like, this is so, they're going like, look at this cool thing I have. This is worth probably $1 million if I went to Sotheby's, but I ain't going to do that. Ada began attending horse races in the late 1840s and quickly went to work on a new algorithm which she envisioned would utilize her mathematical prowess to outwit the bookmakers and amass a fortune. She really was a Bankman Fried ahead of her time. This fortune, she hoped. This is where they all go. This is why Silicon Valley should not be running anything, because this is where it always goes. Inevitably, this is where it goes. How can I use this for personal gain, etc.? It is what it is. Okay, yeah. This fortune, she hoped, would fund the construction of the analytical engine. That's total Bankman Fried. I'm an ethical capitalist. I'm an ethical capitalist. I'm going to get $1 billion so that I can invest it all in charity. Sir, sit down. Anyway, well, he will be for the next 20 something years in prison, but how dare him steal all those rich people's money? Anyway, she attracted a circle of wealthy friends whom she recruited into the gambling syndicate, which they hoped would make them rich with Ada's math and probability equations on their side. Again, Samuel Bankman Fried. Okay. It didn't. In total, Ada's crew lost 3,200 pounds, which would be about £250,000 today, which is not...
Holy shit.
Not, you know, the billions that Bankman-Fried cost people, but you get the idea. It's tale as old as time.
There weren't billions available at the time. Like, that's
that is a lot of money. The losses and financial pressure would put Ada in a rough situation, facing extortion and blackmail. And out of other options, Ada had to tell her husband how badly she had up. Now, her husband...
And it was big.
Because it's not the loss of the money. It's that I was trying to commit a crime.
And here's the kicker. Because she was a woman and an aristocratic one, especially at the time, she actually had to have his signed permission to gamble.
Yeah.
So he had signed a permission slip from her husband to be able to gamble. But
it's a lady gambling. This is already bad. And then she's trying to perpetrate larceny. Like, I'm doing it with math. Like, bitch, like, found an algorithm to beat the law.
Well, I don't know if it was defined as...
I
honestly, I think she was before her time, because I think she was doing it before it was illegal. And I have to give her some flowers for that. She was committing crimes that hadn't been defined yet. And I love that for her. She's a genius.
It's just
she's a
bad.
pioneer.
It's like she's doing something that's not completely legal. It's like, we're going to use math to like game the system, which is kind of not what gambling is. Gambling is a game of chance, and you're trying to engage in a game of chance by having no chance, by determining the outcome ahead of time. It's like, I give her flowers, but I'm saying
cheating
but I'm
the
saying
system.
socially.
Mm-hmm. Socially at the time,
and involving like other people and other people's money, like it's just
so at the time she had, not too long before this point, actually sent a letter to her mom talking about, kind of alluding, probably like trying to gird her mother for the future, like, hey, did you see this article about this woman who gambled so much that she brought so much shame to her name and her title, and her husband ended up killing himself? Like, it's crazy that kind of thing could happen, right? Like, women should, right? Women should, like, right?
Yeah,
Mom?
but it's also just like the embarrassment of that she hustled their friends into contributing to the scheme, and they lost a substantial sum of money. So there's like, it's like other stuff on top of that. So,
that's huge. But all of that together on top of her father being,
it's just like,
notably lost to gambling debt. To preface what we're about to discuss, if her gambling debts and her foray into basically establishing a gambling syndicate made headlines, it would have stopped her reputation, her husband's reputation, her mother's reputation, which her mother had been working on since before she was born. Like, it would have everyone. So she was, once they went to debt, in a very unique position to be extorted, because her name making headlines would have been a big deal. Anyone else she was hanging out with, their names making headlines for like gambling, end of sentence.
Yeah.
Who cares? But she was Lady Ada Lovelace. And if she made headlines for her, and the people who tried to extort her knew this, she'd be ruined. Her family would be ruined. Her husband would be embarrassed. Her mother would be like, it would have flipped everything. So she was uniquely poised to be taken advantage of after her algorithm that simply didn't work out.
So her and her husband settled the debts, collecting the modern day equivalent of like NDAs from the people that threatened her, and like defended her reputation.
Yeah. Fresh off his abrupt confrontation with his wife's vices, with their marriage under strain, William and Ada were about to receive even more bad news. Ada's health had already begun to decline more noticeably in the late 1840s, with symptoms that grew progressively worse over time. By the early 1850s, it became clear that she was suffering from a severe and terminal condition, uterine cancer. As her health continued to fail towards the end of her life, and medical science wasn't advanced enough to help her, Ada developed an opiate addiction. At one point, she was prescribed strong camphor pills to manage the effects of withdrawal from opiates, which she referred to as the jumps.
She had the DTs.
She had the DTs, but like a good lady established at her time, she was well medicated and that up her brain and it up everything, and it made her touch with herself.
So mom did all that, and her daughter turned out to be like having affairs with people, a drug addict, a gambler. Yeah, that.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out like kids are going to be kids with their own life story, and it doesn't matter if you hate their father; they're still going to be their own person. And to some degree, she grew into a person that her mother would have hated because she restricted her from her father. But honestly, when I look at her life, she was just a woman.
Yeah. On her deathbed, she called her husband to her and told him something. He left immediately, and that was their last interaction, months before her death. And we still to this day don't know what it is she shared with him. Charles Dickens, a friend of her father, visited her deathbed and read her a passage from one of his novels.
Like Charles Dickens read to her on her deathbed. Like that just really struck me. That's why I included that. Ada Lovelace died of uterine cancer, as far as we can tell, on November 27th, 1852, at the age of 36. She was buried at her request in the Byron family vault inside the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in the English town of Hucknall. Her coffin was placed side by side with her father's, who had also died at the age of 36. And neither her mother nor Charles Babbage attended her funeral. She and her mother had a series of fiery discourse that probably put them off each other. Also, her mother started supremely following to the point of feeling like she was in love with a really like religious, like basically a Joel Osteen of her time. And Ada was like, that guy sucks and you suck. But her mother was at her deathbed till she died. Her mother at her deathbed did refuse a lot of people attendance to her that she probably would have appreciated, but that's what it was. So her son Byron went into the Royal Navy and unfortunately died young at the age of 26. Her son Ralph took over the family estate after Byron's death, and he carried on the family's aristocratic name and in their footsteps for pretty much forever. He was like that. He was the heir. He was the spare who became the heir, but he aired it up. That was his whole. Her daughter, I find really fascinating. Her daughter became one of the preeminent scholars in the Arabic language of their time. She and her husband spent a lot of time in the Middle East. They became really big horse people. She was a horse girl who married a guy who let her be like an extra horse girl. And so when they went to the Middle East, they found Arabian horses who at the time were endangered. And they were like, oh my God, these horses are so great. So they actually brought some of these Arabian horses home, bred them with English horses, and any Arabian horse, like 90% of Arabian horses that exist today are descendants of Ada's daughter's ranch, basically. Like Arabian horses exist today because of Ada Lovelace's daughter.
Maybe that's who Jay-Z Knight should have channeled instead of Romth, given her penchant for horses.
Despite her massive contributions to computer science, some historians still to this, not really to this day, but still at least up until the 20th century or so, denied her credit for her contributions. And they, for various reasons, insisted that it was Charles Babbage who was responsible for the things that she did. So we're going to conclude with a statement from James Essinger, who is an incredible biographer. He's written at least 3 books on Ada, and he's going to go over some of the misogyny and scrutiny around her.
So this is from Essinger's book, Charles and Ada, Charles being Charles Babbage. It was only in the 1970s that Charles's work has received intense scrutiny, which in turn shone a new spotlight on Ada's own work. From the 1970s until around the early years of the 21st century, Ada was seen by many male computer scientists as an overrated aristocratic amateur who was little more than a painful thorn in Charles's side. Male computer scientists have frequently preferred to see Ada like this. The idea that a mere woman, 24 years his junior and born into privilege, and the daughter of a bisexual poet to boot, could possibly have added anything to Charles's intellectual life is as much an anathema to them as the discovery of an impossible-to-remove bug at the heart of some pet peeve software they've designed.
Essinger asserts conclusively that there's absolutely no reason why we can't trust what Charles Babbage says in his autobiography about the genesis of Ada's writing about the analytical engine.
Scholars also like to reflect on some of Ada's comments about the analytical engine as though they're prescient of modern AI, particularly. Quote, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths."
I personally find that this is more an observation of the technology available at the time rather than a grand assertion about AI in the 21st century, which is how some people have in recent times tried to structure that statement. I think she was really just observing on what this theoretical engine could do. And I think taking that out of context is a bit of a disservice to her. But I like the idea that she has such prescient ideas that she's predicting things hundreds of years in the future. So I'll sign on. I'm into it.
The Tupac of computer programming. Since 2009, Ada Lovelace Day has been celebrated on the second Tuesday of October to celebrate and raise awareness of the contributions of women in STEM fields. The theatre at the Royal Institution in London hosts a science cabaret at which women in STEM give short talks about their work or research. As of November 2015, all new British passports have included an illustration of Lovelace and Babbage.
The Department of Defense of the United States of America created a programming language called Ada, named after her. It is incredibly secure and it is still used in security operations in governments today. It is also still taught in a few universities, but it's so cumbersome that it's almost taught as like a testament to how hard some languages are. So, you know what? She was hard to love, and so is the computer language, and we love them both for that. In 2021, this really excited me. Lovelace was directly honored in the code name of NVIDIA's new GPU architecture in its RTX 4000 series. It was called Ada Lovelace, and it is the only architecture that was ever like a full, like first and last name. And like, it was super cool because NVIDIA is one of the top graphic cards designers in the space. And I'm a VR nerd. So I'm like, hey guys, remember me? Let me tell you about Ada Lovelace. And I just, yeah, that I've been a big NVIDIA, not fangirl, but appreciator for some time. Okay. So I really love that about her and about them.
I mean, I don't know what any of that means. So that is, you know what? You don't do?
That's okay. I'm sorry. Listen. I forget these things.
No, I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna give you the response.
Not to.
That's really cool.
Thank you. And I love you enough not to tell you anything else about it. I would show you my tits if we weren't on a podcast right now.
So in July 2023, the UK's Royal Mint issued 4 commemorative £2 coins in various metals to, quote, honor the innovative contributions of computer science visionary Ada Lovelace and her legacy as a female trailblazer, unquote.
Finally, I'm going to talk about steampunk, which I did not realize was influenced by our girl, because apparently at least some subset of steampunk is based on the idea that Ada and Charles actually built these machines to fruition, both the difference and analytical engines. And that is sort of the basis of this steam-driven society that everybody wears clothes that are kind of hot about. In fact, my engagement ring when I got married was steampunk. So Ada Lovelace has influenced so much of my life. But I actually didn't know about their influence on the steampunk genre.
I was not aware either. I just thought it was a bunch of nerds.
It is. Both can be true.
I'm being such an asshole in this episode because I'm just like, nerd.
No, it's okay because you're being an asshole, but I'm the recipient of it. Hi, it's me. Hi, me. I'm the nerd. Oh my God, you have an alert for me? I'm so flattered.
I have a question. Ella, did you get married on Halloween or Friday the 13th?
Halloween.
Nerd checklist. You know, yeah.
It just became
my ex-girlfriend, when she got married, they got married on Halloween, and I have a picture of me signing their marriage certificate. Anyway, let's conclude.
Obviously, her highest recognition is because she both wrote the first computer program and she was the first female dev to have a bunch of dudes dismiss her accomplishments in her field. And that is really more poignant to me than anything. But that's it, Lovelace, and you're welcome, and good night.
We did it.
We did it.
For some housekeeping, the script was written by Ella Muff Darling. It was read by Ella and by myself, Sovereign Sire. It is produced by Josh Anderson. Some housekeeping, if you would like to support the podcast, you can support us at patreon.com/illrepute. We have one tier. If you join that tier, we have occasional bonus content. Treat it like a tip jar. It is free to subscribe, and there you get updates. You know, we post scripts after the show, things like that. You get the uncensored video content that does not go to YouTube, and we're going to be changing what we put on YouTube. So if that's what you're into, that's a special reason to get on Patreon. Also, we went viral on TikTok. On the TikToks. We got a lot of new subscribers, like 400, 500 of you guys. So welcome. Aloha. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for sticking around. And that's the end of the show. We did it.
That's it.
We did it.
We did it. Thank you. Thank you, Joshy. Thank you, listeners, viewers.
Yes. All right, let's stop recording.